So that led us to a fairly major decision, which was to actually see whether we could prevent cancer in those families. In fact, I'd already started down this road as a result of meeting this family up in Weymouth, who had another form of hereditary cancer called FAP, familial adenomatous polyposis, where you get thousands of polyps. That's a picture of the polyps in the bowel there. And Mum had it, and she had to have a colon taken out, and we were checking the kids, and in fact Jonathan, who's now one of my patients and grown up, also had inherited the gene. And it struck me that we should be doing something with him and people like Jonathan to prevent it, not only for their sake, but also because if we could prevent them from getting cancer, then we could prevent the rest of us getting cancer, because the underlying genetics of the cancer is the same. And in fact, I used the analogy of taking the canaries down the pit. These were our canaries. They were so much more susceptible to cancer that if we could save them, it would save the rest of us. And so we started a project, and we called it, and the idea of genetically targeted trials. And I called it CAP. I called it CAP because that stands for Concerted Action Polyp Prevention, because there was a big grant came from Europe called Concerted Actions. But the secret reason I called it CAP was because, of course, there's a very local lad called Andy. And so all around the world now they talk about the CAP studies in very serious terms, and they don't realise they're talking about Andy. My machines just stopped working. Anyway, so we had to change the name when the Concerted Action money went out, but we still call it CAP. So I'll just go back a moment. So we set off on the study, and I'm going to now concentrate 18 years of work in 43 centres in 16 countries into 1-2 sentences. Essentially, the thing we decided to test, two things. One was resistant starch, a form of indigestible carbohydrate or fibre, and the other was aspirin. And aspirin had been shown by a lot of indirect ways that it might protect you against cancer. And so we gave 1,000 people with this Lynch syndrome, the mismatch repair problem, around the world, aspirin or nothing, to see whether the people given aspirin were better off. And after 4 years treatment, when we opened the box in 2007, made no difference whatsoever. And I was a bit miffed, because by this time I'd been on the case for 15 years. And they stopped our grants and they said, sorry, you're going to have to give up now. But we kept going because I'd hidden some of the money. And so we got to 2008, and I had one research worker left for a professor from Denmark, and I asked her to just go and count the cancers one more time, because we planned to do this as a long-term follow-up. And I said, I want you to go away, and hopefully what you'll find is when you count the cancers, after 4 years there's no difference, but then from then on, the people who are on the aspirin will fall away, and the people who got on the placebo will carry on getting more cancers. And she came back 3 hours later with this graph, and she said, is that what you like? And I said, that's exactly what I wanted, thank you very much. So the top line there, the 400 and odd people who were taking the placebo tablets, and the bottom line are the people who were taking the aspirin tablets, and that's called a cumulative. It's a collection of cancers over time. So we published a paper last December. Some of you might have seen me on the telly. I even ended up live on Al Jazeera, but that was late at night. I'd been out for wine by then, so I was very So we did the whole media thing, because what we discovered was that taking 2 aspirins a day for 2 years cut your cancer risk in these families by 63%. So we're now making this a worldwide policy to treat people with that hereditary form of cancer with aspirin. And now setting up another trial called CAP3 to see if we can actually work out whether a smaller dose than 2 tablets a day will have the same benefit. So that's very exciting. And this is the graph from the paper in the Lancet, which is a more sophisticated version of the one I just showed you. So the black bar is when we were giving the aspirin, no difference between the 2 lines, but then you can see the top line takes off as the cancers continue to occur in the people who weren't given aspirin. So we still don't know, we can talk later if you have time, about why aspirin's doing this. It doesn't really matter, it's so cheap, we can give everybody aspirin, so that's the next big mission in my life. And these are the fancy stats, but what that's saying is what I told you earlier, 63% reduction in cancer. So, going back to Andy, we've got an answer to this cartoon. So if you see the best thing you can do is give up smoking, give up drinking, and fried food. And he said, and Andy said, what's the second best thing? So the second best thing you can do is take an aspirin. So I'd like to finish in the last couple of minutes with the reason I'm in today's Daily Mail, which is something of a challenge to my politics, but never mind. So we teamed up, again, the entrepreneur in me got involved with a lad called Jonathan O'Halloran, who had literally invented something in his garage. And I was asked to talk to him and Elaine Warburton, a former nurse and auditor from Price Waterhouse, and I think we're setting up a company. And I said, well, you know, it sounds a great idea. I'm a bit busy, so I'll just be an advisor. So for a couple of years I was advising them. In 2008 I joined them as the medical director. And we just employed in the last 6 months 16 more people. So we're a staff of 32 now. We've got an office in Singapore, an office in America, and we're taking off. But the headquarters is in Newcastle at the Centre for Life. And the idea, which Jonathan had come up with, he actually picked up at the bagel stand in Harvard. He was talking to a guy called Charlie Lieber, a very shy chemist, who realised that if you cut silicon very, very thin, it starts to behave like a wire, a conductive wire. And so essentially these are called nanowires. And nanowires made out of silicon, if you stick something on them, the electrical conductance changes. And so Jonathan realised if we stuck DNA on them, then what you could do is actually basically, as the DNA sequences, the electrical effect of the sequencing would be picked up by the wire. So we convert DNA sequence straight into computer code and cut out all the middlemen. And the bottom line is it works. So we've now bought from Charlie Lieber the worldwide rights to this. So we've now got a team of very unpleasant patent lawyers in America defending us from the Chinese. And to very briefly show you, the bottom left-hand corner is what is a mock-up of the device that we made in Northumberland. The top there is the other clever part here is that not only does it analyse DNA, it will also extract it. So the filter in the top corner there is a simple filter that you just put a blood sample or a tissue sample in one end, and 4 minutes later you get DNA coming out the other end, and that graph shows the DNA coming out, which is a very important first step. The second step is that we've got to amplify it, we've got to take the bit we're interested in and make lots of copies of it. And this is called PCR. And the white lines there on that graph, if I can see it, all of those were done with our little device, and the one on the end was done by a standard hospital machine. The difference being our little device takes only 6 minutes to do a PCR, which would take an hour on a machine about the size of this in most hospitals. So we can actually create a disposable cassette that both extracts the DNA, amplifies the bit you're interested in, and then analyses it. And these are nanowires cut by our friends in Singapore, 30 nanometers across. That's 3 times the diameter of a DNA molecule. So it's a very, very thin. It's about, your fingernails grow at 1 nanometer per second. Useful after dinner conversation. So 30 nanometers isn't very far. And they can accurately cut them, and we can print our DNA questions onto it, capture the molecules. And you end up, and this little circle here is around one of our molecules sticking to the wire and the electrical signal being detected by the wire. It works. And last week, we got £1.4 million from the Technology Strategy Board to develop a cancer test, which is what is now immediate. Indeed, some of you might have seen on the telly this week. What you don't know is that all Wednesday morning, we were doing television interviews because it was a 1 o'clock deadline for the announcement of this big grant that we were getting along with a bunch of others around the country. It was time for 1 o'clock because David Cameron was going to announce it in the Prime Minister's questions, except he forgot. So, or was too busy or whatever. So at 16 minutes past 1, everybody in the country who got one of the grants got a message saying, hold everything, don't send it out, don't tell anybody. And it was already on the news from Newcastle when they actually sent the message, so we said, sorry, it's already gone. Fortunately, our news team didn't mention the Technology Strategy Board, so we haven't had our wrists slapped. So that's the reason the story's out this week. But it is true, we are going to make a DNA test device, but don't come just yet, we haven't finished building it yet. We should have the first prototype by next year. So, and one of the, in fact, what we also announced in September was we're going to use the same technique to diagnose malaria. Malaria contains DNA like everything else, and we can actually extract DNA from a blood sample from a child who's got malaria, extract the malaria parasite and tell you whether the child's got malaria or not and whether it's chloroquine resistant in 20 minutes with a disposable cassette that we think we can produce for about 10 quid. And these handsets will be about the same as the cost as an iPhone. So this is, and so it sounds remarkable, the idea of putting a DNA device in someone's hand. I was in the Langer Township in South Africa in 2010, chatting to that bloke. He showed us around his house. He was about the size of one of those containers, you know, the containers you get on ships. In fact, a lot of the places were actually containers, they just put doors in the end. And he was living in a place about half the size of that with 12 people. And then he stopped to make a phone call back to his family in Tanzania with some stolen electricity on an old Nokia. And no one in the room particularly noticed that. But it just struck me that the idea of someone actually making an international telephone call from a slum in South Africa, when the guy has to share a room with 12 people, is quite remarkable. And I think that what we're going to do is put DNA testing in the hands of pharmacists, GPs and reals. It won't be remarkable anymore. It'll just be a routine test that you do to target your healthcare. And so one of the things my final sidebar, right now you're staring at me, is that device, one of the things we're developing on it as part of this Q Cancer project is to look up for those bits of repetitive DNA that I just talked to you about. So remember I said that the problem in mismatch repair families is that they can't accurately copy bits of DNA that are the same letter over and over again. It's very hard to read that, but our device should be able to read it. If it can, then that will mean that everybody who gets cancer can have a test for that particular condition done by the technician in the hospital when the tumour is being processed, so we don't have to send it off to a special place to do that test, which will mean that we'll find, we think there are about 60,000 people in Britain who've got that inherited condition, and we only know 6,000 of them because we can't find them. So this will allow us to do that. But from a commercial point of view, thinking my dad's selling pit this also has another dimension, because when you do identity testing, you look for repetitive DNA, and it's the repetitive DNA that differs between us so much. That's how you tell one person from another. And so when the police have got a blood stain and they send it off to the labs, what they do is they analyse these bits of repetitive DNA to see who the person was on the police database. So in about 3 or 4 years' time, if you're watching CSI Miami, and the guy says to an improbably beautiful pathologist, pass me the Q-pop, let's see who this guy is. You'll know that I'm almost as rich as Mark. Not quite. Anyway, so I was going to put a whole bunch of summary points on there, but I think I'll just say that I'm very proud to come from Durham. I'm very pleased to say that working with the community in the north of England for the last 30 years, the geneticist has been the making of me. And I'm very delighted to bring a new biotech company back to the northeast and repair some of the things that I owe the area. And thank you for your attention.